Let's start, Liam. Tell me about your relationship with TNA wrestling.
I remember the first episode I ever watched, which was Raven's return to feud with Abyss and Stevie Richards.
So, end of 2009.
Yeah, I remember it being on paid TV service that we had, and I remember being really into it because it was so different.
Because you were a fireball in that segment, right?
Yeah, right? So, I had seen, at that point, right, I was 12?
You're obnoxiously young.
Yeah, whatever I was around that. And I had seen ECW. I had seen, early WWE, WWF stuff. But I hadn't seen anything else, really. I think, actually, no, I had watched, one Chris Hero Ring of Honor match randomly because he was on Border Patrol. And I googled who Chris Hero was, and I was like, oh, Chris Hero versus Tyler Black. And then I was like, this is 40 minutes. Why wrestling doesn't go this long? And then I kind of clicked off of it, and I was like, wrestling should be 10 minutes and have Vladimir Kozlov in it. This isn't what it should be.
This Chris Hero guy just doesn't get it. He's gone nowhere. This isn't what wrestling should be.
Yeah, you should have seen the mental gymnastics I went through when a Daniel Bryan debuted, and I was like, who's a Bryan Danielson? It was a whole thing.
Yeah, you were listening to Michael Cole, and he's like, oh, this guy.
It wasn't even that. Bryan was the guy that made me actually go and watch indie stuff, right? So that was more I felt like I was in the know, because for me, my friends, we all watched WWE and we knew TNA. That's it. That's all we knew. So I was like, oh, I know this Brian, this before times. I'm so online. Look at me go. But back to TNA, I remember actually what's really funny was I would go to class, and I had one friend who had a bunch of TNA DVDs, and he gave them all to me that month because he was getting out of wrestling. And I remember we're talking about TNA, and he's like, yeah, I like it, but there's too much talking going on. Which is funny, as we were all the WWE guys, but when we turned on TNA, we're like, there's too many angles.
Which is funny, given the name of the show is Total Nonstop Action.
Oh, clearly wasn't living up to it at that point. But yeah, for me personally, after that, I tried to watch it whenever I could, but it always bounced from channel to channel here, and it was always on at 10 p.m. So I would get to it if I could find it, if it was on a channel that we still had. But it was actually really good for a while there, because SmackDown used to precede Impact on the channel where I'd watch SmackDown. So...
Wait, they were on the same channel?
Yeah.
That's very rare in wrestling, isn't it?
They were on Fox 8, right? And I'd go to my grandparents and I'd watch SmackDown on a Thursday, and then as soon as SmackDown finished, it would go straight into Impact. And so that it didn't last long like that. But for a while there, I was like, yo, this is really cool. I get a bit of both. And because I didn't watch Raw, I was only a SmackDown guy. I was like, this is my whole day made. And then after that,
Wait, why were you only a SmackDown guy?
I didn't like Raw.
Well, that's fair.
SmackDown had, the better mid-card, I think. Because it had, Morrison, Hardy, the aforementioned Vladimir Kozlov. All guys that I was a massive fan of. The Brian Kendrick. So I was a SmackDown ECW guy. ECW, I think, was actually the show that bumped Impact out of that time slot.
Wow. That's Christian's fault. Christian betraying TNA by jumping to the WCW and then kicking them out of their time slot.
Which was then actually replaced by nothing for a while, and then replaced by real NXT, not talk show NXT.
Yeah, you never got the reality show?
We did a little bit, but that was mostly online.
And you didn't get NXT Redemption?
I'd watched a lot of NXT Redemption, actually, because it did show up occasionally on TV, but I think that was at the point where I was online trying to watch anything I could, basically. So I watched all of NXT Redemption, and I watched a shit ton of 2010 superstars. So that's my big purview there. You want to talk about some Trent Beretta, Kurt Hawkins matches? I'm your man.
Excuse me, we'll only talk about a couple of Greg Marashulo matches when we get to them in 2013.
Obviously. To wrap it all back up real quickly, but after I had seen those episodes on paid TV, I would... You know what's real? I want to hear a real funny fucking TNA story that I have.
Go on.
At my local... It was some video game store, right? That also sold a bunch of things. They sold TNA DVDs, right? But Do you know where they put the TNA DVDs?
Oh no, where?
On the same row as the hentai.
Oh well, that makes sense though. It's total on. It's TNA, Liam. It's
Yeah, so I remember like they had like hentai DVDs and the anime DVDs below them, and then they had like TNA on the top in like the don't touch row. It was very funny.
Do you legitimately think there's somebody there who got a bunch of wrestling DVDs on like the discount, and they got them in the door? It's like, oh, TNA, oh, that's obviously pretty racy. We got to put that in the racy section.
My assumption is that they thought it was like UFC, like actual fights. You know what I mean? Like I think they thought it was like gory MMA stuff, and like we're gonna put that up on the top row because who would buy that stuff?
Jeff Jarrett's doing shoot fights.
Yeah, basically, right? Well, he was, so there you go. Yeah, and then I went to Sanity Music, and that's where I used to buy all my TNA DVDs. So I was pretty, like, obviously, not the biggest TNA guy on the podcast, but I was fairly into it from like that. Once I was like 13, I was fairly into it, buying any DVD I could see, watching the hell out of my Best of the X Division DVD until like those CDs were ruined. Yeah, the Best of like the Tag Teams DVD. Like, because you gotta remember, Australia Internet now is horrific, right? Australian Internet in 2010, it was impossible. You could barely watch anything. So that was still very much DVD culture then. Like, I was still buying. From like 08 to 11, I was buying my WWE and TNA DVDs, and that was the only way I watched wrestling. And 2013 was like buying every PWG DVD, and that was it. Before, like, I would never torrent things because that's illegal. But if I had the ability to, I would have started doing that a little later.
So when did you fall out of love with TNA, Liam? When did you betray the source of your podcast?
That would have been probably consistently stopped watching it around 2015. As much as like the last stuff I was really into was when AJ left. Really,
that broke your heart too much.
Well, I still kept watching, but it wasn't even because of AJ. I just remembered that was the point when like he was gone, was when I stopped watching it as much, because before that I was watching it like weekly, and then you could honestly say like EC3's entire run was when I stopped watching, basically. And it didn't have anything to do with him, but that was just the time period encapsulated. Like most people, I think, I'd parachuted in for anything that was notable, and then that was it.
Yeah, not to skip ahead to January 2014 and the podcast, but I do think that's the point at which a lot of people kind of gave themselves permission to stop watching. Because within 2 weeks of each other, AJ left, then Sting left. And those were the two like most heavily pushed, heavily featured acts, along with Kurt Angle, for the best part of the last 10 years of the company's history. And they both left within 2 weeks of each other. And I think people were just like, oh, yeah, okay, I'm done. No episode of Impact has been watched by as many people as the last episode that featured Sting. They never did a better number than that episode ever again.
I wonder if there is some relationship with the increase in popularity of New Japan and the ease of availability of stuff like your PWG and your Ring of Honor. I wonder if people started to find their alternative pro wrestling fix elsewhere around the same time.
I don't even think it's those specific companies. I just think it's the change of the internet era where it's not even Ring of Honor you're competing with or New Japan. It's also Progress or Defy or Evolve or Rev Pro. It's literally every company under the sun now is available at your fingertips, most of which are very easy to do so. You could just log onto a streaming service. You can log onto IWTV and watch all the wrestling you want these days. So I think it just reached this stage where, in 2006, it was WWE, Ring of Honor, TNA. WWE easiest to access, TNA second easiest to access, RH the least easy to access, I suppose, at the time. So
yes,
like if you wanted to watch, PWG, you'd have to, as you mentioned, you'd have to buy a DVD, which is a barrier to entry most people aren't going to cross. Whereas now, if you want to watch PWG, it's very easy to find PWG both legally and illegally if you'd like. So people just do that instead. And TNA just didn't have enough anymore, as they lost Styles, as they lost Sting, as they lost Angle, as they lost Joe, as they lost Rude, as they lost Storm, as they lost all the people that people associated as backbones of the company. People just moved on to different things, and maybe moved on to no wrestling whatsoever. I'm interested. I'd like to do like market research to try and find out just what percentage of AEW's current audience used to watch TNA, because it's probably not insubstantial.
I imagine it's because no matter what, right? TNA lost a lot of, it lost a large majority of its fan base,
which is basically going to be the story of this podcast.
It still managed to stick in wrestling people's brains. It was still in the zeitgeist to them because of it was, it left an impact.
Well, hey, it's impossible to avoid. Listen, if there's one thing I've learned, it's impossible not to make impact puns. So get used to them.
Because no matter what, I talked to any of my friends who used to watch wrestling, still watch wrestling. They may not have known of Ring of Honor. They may not have known a New Japan. They all knew TNA. It was firmly planted within their heads of this was the number two company, and it wasn't as good. That was basically what the thing. And I think a lot of that comes from, when people did that large exodus. I think a lot of it came from, we don't want to watch WWE light, and it'll be really interesting to, once we do reach that stage in the podcast of those years, to go back and listen to this episode where we talk about it and see, was it as much WWE light at the time as we thought it was? Or was that an over-exaggeration? Was that something to do with WWE being on a fairly decent run? Because 2013, 2014, WWE was pretty good. And then it fell off for a bit and then came back in that 2016 and start of 2017 and then just went crashing down. It's hard to be WWE light when WWE is bad. It's even harder to be WWE light when WWE is actually firing on all cylinders and is good, because everything you do is going to be compared, and you don't even have the cynicism of the fan base to back you up.
Yeah.
Because, I think something that, I do look forward to getting into years and years down the track is the whole, everything was compared. You know what I mean? Everything TNA did was an instant comparison, and to be fair, it wasn't entirely not their own fault. But there was also some big, jumps where, Aries was compared to Punk the entire time, right? And Young was compared to Bryan, right? And that whole thing. And it's just, it felt like a lot of people were just I'm going to dissuade this thing immediately because I already have the thing, and you're not providing that alternative. You're just being it.
The Aries example there is dumb. But the Young one is obviously... Young was a direct, response to WWE. That one is... It was the week after Daniel Bryan won the belt. Or the week of. And it's Eric Young won the belt. Now it's wait a minute.
So, I think as soon as TNA ceased being an alternative to, everyone, that's when it was oh, we have no reason to be here anymore. It's not the alternative. It's not doing anything different to separate itself. It's just more WWE programming and worse WWE programming. Significantly worse WWE programming.
So before we begin, I suppose I should tell you about my relationship with TNA Wrestling, Liam.
Oh, do you have one?
No, I've never watched it. This is my first time going through all these shows. What a twist that would be. It's just oh no, I've never seen this stuff before.
You're just really good at studying.
I can just check cage match and Wikipedia pages very quickly.
Yeah. So, Garrett Kidney, did you ever watch TNA?
Like all people, I would have grown up watching a ton of WWE. And in 2006 was the closest I was to being one of those people who just stopped watching wrestling because WWE just bored me to tears and there was no one there anymore I liked. And I was maybe I don't watch a ton of wrestling. And it's probably, thinking back, it's probably the year I watched the least of WWE. I'd still watch WrestleMania because who doesn't watch WrestleMania? But that was the stage where I was teetering on the edge of not being a wrestling fan anymore before I discovered the wonders of TNA wrestling, which I would have watched bits and pieces of before, but it would always have been the dumbest shit from the Asylum era. It would be the Dup Cup, and it's what is this thing, and why does it exist? Whereas when I got TV over here, it was on Bravo at the time, and I watched the November primetime special that had a barbed wire cage match, great match, very bloody match. Kurt Angle's debut was on that show, and then you saw people in the X division like AJ Styles, like Chris Sabin, like Christopher Daniels, and like, oh, there's actually good wrestling in the world, not just the same old WWE televised bullshit. And even like 2006 was broadly, there's good stuff in WWE in 2006, but it's still WWE. There's nothing like not WWE about it. So if you're disenfranchised with that, there's nothing left for you.
06, 07 is like arguably the most WWE is too, because it's pure like just big jacked stars with some edgy content and women doing sexy things and just, big blood, money still. Like, it's just, that is like, it's South Park WWE, right? You know what I mean? Like, that's 100% what that era is.
So that my brother went to Boston with my dad on holiday, and he brought me back as a present the Best of the X Division Volume 2 on DVD, which is the cool DVD that has that like animated cover where all the wrestlers are animated forms. And I watched that DVD like similar to you, like back and forth multiple times, and like that's what I fell in love with. I fell in love with the X Division. I fell in love with Alex Shelley and Chris Sabin and Sanjay Dutt and Shark Boy and P.D. Williams and AJ Styles and Christopher Daniels and Samoa Joe and all those cool wrestlers. And I decided there and then that I would adopt TNA Wrestling, Liam, as a cause, for better or worse, for what clearly means the remainder of my life until I die. And I've been watching every week ever since, because when I wouldn't have the patience to wait until it aired on TV over here, so I would watch it on Daily Motion in the era when you could only watch in like parts. So it's like Impact Part 1, which is 8 minutes, and Impact Part 2, which is 8 minutes, and then you can't find Impact Part 3 because it turns out it wasn't uploaded properly or it got copyright striked, so you have to go find the third 8 minutes of the show. Kids these days don't know how good they have it, Liam, that they can just steal things easily, as opposed to back in the day when stealing things was actually much harder.
I must be the last era of it, right? Of people who actually had to like hunt for things on the internet to try and find them. These people don't know about the ditch, do they? These kids these days, they don't know about no ditch. They don't know about using weird software that lets you download videos straight from websites.
Or finding those websites, those like weird sites that stream these shows in parts, that like you would always run the risk of having a horrible virus that destroys your computer forever.
And you'd get it.
And it's worth it to watch like parts of The Apprentice or something stupid. As opposed to now you can just download it with the click of a button or stream it on a website legally. It's so much easier these days. Back in those days, back when we had to struggle and suffer to watch things we wanted to watch.
I have another little fun fact about TNA in my formative years of being a wrestling fan. It was the first thing I ever pirated. Was an Impact pay-per-view.
What show was it?
It was the one that had the Brian Kendrick debut and the Mr. Anderson debut.
So Genesis 2010.
Yeah, that was the first show I ever torrented in my life.
I have to report you actually now. I have to take you in for stealing TNA shows. I'm so sorry. Even though I just admitted to doing it myself via Dailymotion. But Dailymotion is that's the fault of obviously the person who uploaded it, not mine.
Yes, yeah. We're just consumers. Well, by that same logic, whoever uploaded that torrent file, it's not my fault for downloading it. It's their fault for uploading it.
Exactly. So then I would have covered TNA. I started writing about TNA in the summer of 2009, which would have been around the year you started watching. Then I would have started reviewing it weekly from 2012 through 2017, then work for the company. Yeah, that's my journey with TNA wrestling from beginning to now. And I'm interested to go back and watch it all, because like the story of TNA is the story of unfulfilled potential. Even like we're going to talk about these first two pay-per-views that took place in June 2002, and I think that's very much the story of unfulfilled potential in many ways. It's interesting to see the ideas that developed and didn't develop, the missed opportunities, and just you have the distance these days where the dumb stuff doesn't quite make you as mad anymore. Well, there's some stuff that makes me mad on these shows, but for very different reasons. But the bad booking stuff is more funny than like infuriating these days.
You can watch it and go, oh, look at them. They're falling over their feet again, aren't they? But it's like, it's not depressing anymore. Yeah. I think it also helps that Impact is in as good of a position as it's been in as many years now. You know what I mean? It's like, if Impact now was in the dregs, it'd still be kind of sad, but like they're doing well for themselves now. So it's kind of, you can go back and watch this stuff and go, well, so at least to this point, of, the 18th of June 2021, Impact is doing well, so I don't feel bad going back and watching stuff when they weren't.
Yeah, because there was like the era from like 2014 through 2016 where, they lost Spike, they moved to Destination America, they lost Destination America, they moved to Pop, and they were on the verge of going out of business pretty much every other week, as opposed to the last like 3 years where it's just been stable, which is unlike TNA.
Stable, having a consistent influx of new, exciting talent that they, for the most part, seem to be capitalizing on. And it's just it's good. it's nice that Impact has found its feet, found its place in the wrestling zeitgeist yet again.